Hey everybody, it's Mike from Here the Watchmen, and we're coming at you from Salmon, Idaho. Way in the mountains of Idaho, beautiful little town up here where it was 20 degrees this morning, right, Jay?
Yeah, that's what
Little
I heard.
chilly, little chilly, but it's a dry cold. But this morning I wanted to bring Jay on the show to talk to you about an initiative that he has called the 5 and 5. Jay started the Calvary Chapel up here that Jeannie and I now go to. Wonderful church, about 400 members, and that's pretty good for a town of, what, 3,000
3,000.
people?
Yeah.
Yeah. And two services on Sunday, a wonderful young pastor that Jay actually roped in. But we have Jay here today to talk to you about what's called the 5 and 5 initiative. And we want all of you to join into this. Jay, thank you so much for coming in today.
Sure.
Jay, what is 5 and 5?
Well, 5 and 5 is something that I discovered for myself to start with, Mike. It was I found myself not in the Word and not in prayer, not on my knees, and so I kept trying to carve out 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it just didn't work. And so I decided that I would go ahead and just do 5 minutes in the Word every day and 5 minutes in prayer, and then just at least I could say that. I can't say, because I can say, well, I just don't have the time. I just don't have an hour. But with the 5 and 5, I found that within no time I was back to being in the Word a half hour and on my knees for a half an hour, and I can see that God was using that time in really good ways, because I always prayed, but not necessarily on my knees. And when I lined my heart up with my head and my knees, something new began to happen, even more so than before. The fruit that God brought before me to pick had already been watered and already been fed, and it had been cultivated, and then boom, it's ready to fall off the tree. And so I'm harvesting fruit all over the place. And then he wanted me to make sure that I helped them to grow up. Just be a resource to them. So I encourage you to do the same thing. I encourage you to just spend 5 minutes in prayer, 5 minutes in the Word every day, and let God develop that for you, because you don't have to do any more than that. Pretty soon you just want to be in the Word, and you'll want to be on your knees, and you can do it. You can do that. Nobody can say, I don't have 5 and 5. We all have 5 and 5. Get up 5 minutes earlier, that's all. 10 minutes earlier. So coming from that, one time during that time period, a fellow came to my mind that used to feed people down in Spokane, Washington. And he'd feed the homeless, and he'd give them shirts and coats and things like that. And I heard him on the radio talking for about a month and trying to raise funds in order to have a Thanksgiving dinner for him. And he started to say the last week before Thanksgiving, he says, I just don't understand it. He says, we've got, $65, and we haven't gotten any donations or anything. And I said, well, that's interesting. And then God really put it on my heart. He said, do something. So I gave the man a call. And I said, look, I don't know how the Lord's going to do it, but if you'll come tomorrow, I'll have some things for you. So I thought what I would do was I would go ahead and purchase some turkeys or something, and at least a couple of turkeys, and maybe some other things. And so in the meantime, God said, I'm going to do it. And so I made some phone calls to some grocery stores. Every one of them were on board with helping. And this is a city I lived in across the border from Spokane. So I'm talking to people locally, but I said they want to feed people downtown. I gave them the whole spiel as to what was going on, and that it was, in the name of the Lord, and that seemed to be just fine. So I sent my wife out when she got home. I said, honey, can you go out? Can you go to Rosar's and Albertsons, and can you go to Super One and all these other places, and go ahead and pick up food, because we're going to feed people? She said, sure. So she comes back with a trunk full of turkeys,
Wow.
turkeys. She came back with enough rolls to feed probably 400 people, and some pies, probably enough pies for 200 people. And it was more than what I could have imagined. And so I turned around and said, well, I've been making some other phone calls. Can you go back out again? And she did. And so she went out again, and she brought back more pies and more rolls and more turkeys. And finally, we ended up with enough turkey that we could feed about 600 people.
Oh.
You know, and enough rolls for 800 and enough pies for 500. Now, we had no idea how many people we were going to try and feed. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a place to feed them yet. We didn't have anything as far as the information. So that fella comes the next day. His name was Tom. Him and his wife come, and they've been ministering to street people in downtown Spokane for probably around 20 years. And he shows up, and he says, yeah, I'm really downhearted. He says, I just don't understand. And so I said, come on, let's go over to my shop. And I roll up the roller, and there it is, turkeys piled on the floor of this shop in a part that is frozen still because I didn't heat it. And I said, you know, look. And he just couldn't believe it. There were pies stacked 3 feet high, and and he started to cry. Him and his wife just started to cry. I said, can I get involved in this even more? And he said, you can just do whatever you want to do, Mr. Johnson. I said, you know, well, just call me Jay. And he just thought that was something else. And so that came out of 5 and 5. And what I'm going to tell you is that we went to find a place downtown Spokane. The only place there was that wasn't old buildings and stuff that were empty was there was a Mason's Hall. And it was being used, but it was not being used very much. So I checked into it to see if we could use it or if we could, you know, rent it. And they said we could use it. So it had this full kitchen and a big dining area, you know, easily for 200 people. And we figured that people would kind of cycle in and out. So the word went out that we were going to feed a Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? And I didn't know what this was supposed to look like. You know, I didn't know how God was going to actually, you know, make us as people, you know, representing him, how we were going to minister to these people. But I just knew that just standing and putting food on a plate is not something that, you know, that there had to be more to it than that. But I kept waiting, and 10 minutes beforehand, and I had over 50 people from our church that wanted to get involved. And so I've got a staff of 50 people that, you know, way more than what we needed, I figured. But I thought, you know, if they want to get involved, then they should come. So about 10 minutes before this whole thing, we're ready to open the doors, and I said, everybody get around. The Lord has showed me what we were supposed to do. And I said, what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to sit down and talk to these folks as they come in. You know, we're going to have servers, and if you want to rotate out, that's fine. But you're going to be assigned a table. So find a table, that'll be your table, and you sit down with them. And if it's a mother with children, then get their food. If it's a guy with children and no children, you can get their food. And I want everybody to leave here with enough food to take a dish home also. And we had 15 people cooking turkeys for 2 days and boning them so that all this could be ready. And a friend of mine who was an atheist decided to help out, and he owned a Kentucky Fried Chicken. He supplied all the gravy, all the beans in these big tins that were, you know, covered and already hot with the butter melting on them. I mean, we just set them things out, and it was great. And it was just such a blessing. So I said, so we're going to sit and we're going to visit with these people. So people started to come in, about 100 at a time. And we were going to be open for about 4 hours, which is another thing that nobody ever does, evidently. And I just don't know any better. Usually it's about an hour, and then that's it. Well, the fellow who ran the mission downtown, he stopped by because he heard about it. And he comes up to someone and asks, who's putting this shindig on? And they pointed to me. And I said, well, actually, it's the Lord. And he said, do you know what's going on here? And I said, well, yeah, we're feeding people, and we're hopefully, you know, doing something good for them, representing the Lord. No, you don't understand. I feed these same people. They're in and out in 5 minutes. He said, what's going on here is that you're sitting at their table and you're talking to them, and they're talking to you, And they said, we've got to change our whole format. We need to meet them at the table. We need to spend time with them. If we need to start serving food by dishing it out at the table, we're going to do it. That's what we're going to do.
Well, Jay, it's so important. What you bring up here. 25, 30 years ago, I myself was homeless on the streets of Los Angeles, and it took two individuals who actually stopped for a moment and wanted to help me. And I believe they were angels. I believe they were sent by God. And so many times when we see a homeless person or someone else down on their luck, we think like, I'm just going to look the other way. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Jesus wouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. Jesus would have walked right up to those people, and he would have cleaned their feet.
Sure
that's the way it works.
While they were eating a turkey leg.
That's right.
Eat on that turkey leg, I'll wash your feet.
Yeah, but so here's what's amazing. All of that started from just 5 and 5.
Yes.
5 minutes of prayer and 5 minutes on your knees, right?
Yeah. And God let me know that that's why. Because I was willing to bend my knees. And that's just, that seems so ridiculous. I remember trying to get a fellow to come meet with me and get on his knees. And he just said, no. He said, I can pray sitting down. I said, yeah, but get on your knees before the Lord. I said, I just know he'll honor that. And he just flat out would not do it. And so he continued to be a miserable Christian for the rest of his life. And I unfortunately saw the end of his life, and he was unhappy and didn't feel fulfilled, And so in the rest of that story, because I love to tell stories, and especially love to tell what Jesus is doing.
Yeah, amen.
So the rest of the story was we sent everyone with food, but most people stayed a minimum of an hour. Every single person who sat at a table or served, they all rotated. They just couldn't wait to get back to the tables.
Yeah.
And so everybody had about an hour at the table, maybe 2. The stories that they heard, the growth that they experienced, these people became evangelists, every single one of them.
Yeah.
The Crips, which is a gang,
Yep.
came down to see what we were doing, and they came in and with their chests all puffed up. And as soon as they got in the door, you could see their countenance change. They got talkative. They started talking about their childhood, and how they got in a gang. And so one of our fellows follows them out the door and down the block and is visiting with them. And I was a little bit concerned for him, but then I thought, you know what? Jesus is with him, so I'm not going to worry about it, But what an awesome thing that happened that day. We put a banner up that said, Jesus loves you. And everyone there signed it, including all of the people.
Wow.
We gave fruit when they left. We gave them a Christian 8-track cassette. I'm sorry, 8-track's a little old.
Yeah.
Christian cassette with Christian music on it and a plate of food, and it was marvelous. And like I said, 5 and 5.
Yeah, but here's the thing, Jay. Everybody seems to think like the only way you can do anything like that is if you're like a millionaire.
Right.
People think that about Jeannie and I all the time, about Hear the Watchmen and the other things that we have done. And they think, well, they must be wealthy. You don't have to have money. What you have to have is God. Mm-hmm. If you have God,
He's got money.
God
owns all the money.
He's got the big bucks.
Just in case you were wondering, yeah.
And it's so it's so simple to make a difference in the life of someone out there suffering. I'm telling you, I am not advocating if you see a homeless man or a woman sitting in front of a 7-Eleven or a Circle K or a whatever your little convenience store is where you live. Here it's the discount store. If you see someone like that sitting there having trouble, I'm not advocating you give them money, but I am advocating that you go into that store and you buy them a sandwich or you buy them a bottle of water, because Jesus wants us to look after one another. He can't do it all on his own. He needs us to be active as Christians in our faith and make a difference in the world. I mean, Jay, was that probably one of the most rewarding moments of your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, but there are so many more stories that
Oh.
come out of that. There was a time just the next day I'm walking into a church that a friend of mine goes to, and there's a man just going in a little motorhome across the street, an old ratty motorhome, and he looked pretty disheveled. And the Lord said, "Give him 20." So I walk over and I knocked on the door and I said, "Jesus wants me to give you $20. He starts to cry. He says, "I'm broke down here." He says, "And the kit is $19.95 to put a new carburetor kit in this thing." He said, "And I don't have any money." I said, "Here's another 20. Get something to eat too." And, and what did God do in return? Oh my gosh, how do I know how many times I had cancer? And God decided, no, you don't.
Yeah. No, God will, I don't want to say, let's see. I don't really want to say reward us, but God will take care of us.
Oh, yeah.
If we will just step out of the box.
Yes.
And make ourselves available to his children.
Sure.
To do something to serve them. The God will pay you back tenfold. I promise you, folks. It's amazing. Well, Jay, I really appreciate you stopping by. If the heater doesn't heat up quickly, I'm going to start burning furniture in here. Yeah, it's kind of chilly. But what would you like to say to people before we sign off?
I'd like to encourage you to let God use your hands and your feet, and your money, because it all belongs to him. You'll never see a hearse pull a U-Haul because nobody's taking anything with them. It's just not going to happen. You can be buried in your car, but you're not going to be driving it in heaven. So give it away and watch what God does in return. He can return that long lost son or daughter. He can heal. He can do anything that he wants to do. And if you're about his business, let me tell you something. He wants you to get in his program, not you get in your program and ask him in. Ask him to use you in what he's doing and watch what he does, because it's an amazing thing to see God do things through you that you thought were impossible. But the Bible says nothing is impossible for God. So let him be the one that does impossible things through you. And go ahead and email me and tell me what it is that that you've found God doing, because you decided to bend your knee a little bit and to spend a little time in the Word. You can contact me at jayj8888@gmail.com. That's JAY and then J again, letter J, 8888@gmail.com. I'd really like to know what God's doing through you. And we don't happen to have a copy of the 5 and 5 that we used in our church, but at our church I made up a little leaflet, and it says 5 and 5, and it talks about what God's done. And you can sign the bottom and make a little contract between you and the Lord, or you can take it to your church and say, this is something we could do here. And when we did this at our church, I remember we grew around 100 people within around 3 months after 5 and 5, and probably around 65 adults did that. At the time, we were running probably around 200. So I watched God do that too. I watched God take a young man, and make him our pastor later. But at that time, God told him that he wasn't going to be a finance minister somewhere. He was going to be a preacher, and he thought that was hilarious.
Well, he was Mormon.
He was in school, and he was an LDS.
He was a Mormon.
Yeah, and so he became our pastor some 5 years later. So I encourage you also to take it to your church, and I'd be happy to supply you with the graphics to go ahead and have printed in order to do that in your own church.
So listen, folks, get busy. Activate your faith. You can also contact me. You all know how to get me. Go to hearthewatchmen.com. Click the contact button. That email will come directly to me. Say, I want to talk to Jay about the 5 and 5. And I'll hook you up, connect you up there. The most important thing is, go out today and just do something for Jesus. It's just that simple, and it's just that easy. Jay, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
joining. Jay's going to join us weekly here once we get the studio all set up, where we'll do a show together and just talk to you about how God works.
Yeah.
And just talk to you about what you can do. But until then, like I always say here on the Watchman's Report when we close, there's absolutely nothing that you can't do with Jesus in your heart, except nothing at all. Get out there, get busy, activate your faith. God bless you. Talk to you soon.